get this thing going. All right, good morning, folks. Welcome to a presentation by Polymorphic. They're going to speak to us about agentic AI. Um, Whether folks are aware or not, and I'm sure Kyle and Connor will speak to it. Uh, there's a couple types of AI. You have your basic AI, which is your robotic process automation or RPA, and then agentic AI, which is where it can actually almost think is what the terminology looks like. So it'll take autonomous actions based on the training data and how it's been trained, which I'm sure Kyle and Connor will speak to. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Kyle, and take it away. Thank you.
Sweet. I appreciate it, John. That's
You're welcome.
well put in terms of how agentic where we're moving with agentic AI. But just to introduce myself, good morning, everybody. I'm Kyle. I'm the head of engineering and product development at Polymorphic. We're excited to be partnering with you guys and sharing some more about what we're working on in AI and really where we see the industry going. I know this is a hot button topic. I would say 2 years ago, there was a lot of buzz, and I think we're starting to get to that point where real products, real solutions are being built with these tools that can help all of us in our day-to-day lives. So a couple agenda items. First off, what I'll say is, if you have questions, just pop them in the chat. If it makes sense to stop and discuss in the moment, we can do that. If not, we have a discussion period at the end as well. So if you feel like your question doesn't get answered, don't worry. Happy to chat at the end, and we can talk about all things AI. But yeah, so as we go through this, what we'll start with is really just describing what agentic AI is. I feel like agentic sounds like a fancy word, so we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about what the key capability are of agentic AI. And as John's suggesting, there is a historical version of AI or machine learning or automation, and we can talk about why this is new, why this is different. And to kind of help illustrate some of that, we actually have some pretty cool real world examples from New Jersey governments who are working with us now. And then finally, we can chat about where to get started. I know sometimes a lot of these like new technologies, it's hard to know if they're ready, if they're ripe, like what is a good way to get started and prove it out within your organization. So we can chat about that. And then, like I said, at the end, happy for a question discussion kind of period as well. All right. So really what agentic AI gets to at its core is using modern, what we would call like large language model AI to do goal-directed things, right? So historically, if you think about process automation or traditional machine learning, you're usually thinking about how do we automate this workflow, and specifically this workflow, where in this new agentic world, what you're really looking to do is describe to a model what your ideal outcome state is, and then allowing that model to make a lot of the decisions between where we are now and how we arrive at that outcome state. Of course, it's going to need some guidance and training, like all AI does in figuring out how to get there. But ultimately, the idea is that by giving it this more goal-oriented paradigm for deciding what to do, we're enabling it to start performing tasks and maybe even figuring out what those tasks are on behalf of staff or users or really whoever that application is centered around. So how does this differ from traditional AI? What's interesting, I think, is if we almost take a step back here, this idea of agentic AI, like that word has been thrown around in like the last 2 to 3 years, really often. And folks make it sound like this is a new idea, right? If you look at our friend Clippy in the corner, I'm sure a lot of folks are old enough to remember that guy. This idea of agentic AI, like the ability of an AI to have this outcome-oriented model, actually goes back to the days of Clippy, right? So I think in the mid 90s, Microsoft debuted this product. Of course, we're all familiar with it, and it wasn't quite ready at the time, right? Clippy was probably a little buggy, couldn't do a whole lot of things, but the idea was there that you should have this assistant or co-pilot in your application helping you along the way. Now, of course, fast forward 30 years, like I think that came out maybe 1995 or something like that. So you fast forward 30 years where the actual underlying technology has caught up with these ideas, right? And so while folks have been trying to get at this notion of agentic AI for a long time, almost like a sci-fi kind of idea, we finally made the technical progress under the hood necessary to enable those actual applications. And so when we think about how we've traditionally trained AI, and even when I started in machine learning and AI research, so to speak, it was very rule based, right? So it was a lot of times you would think about the steps to a workflow and how do we automate individual steps in this workflow. Um, Typically, that means a lot of pre-training, a lot of rigid rules, and then that ends up making it so that you have pretty inflexible automation, right? So when things fell into those buckets well, it was easy to automate them. But of course, real world data doesn't always subscribe to the rigid frameworks that traditional automation would bring. And so what's really cool about agentic AI, and especially large language agentic AI, is it's adaptable. It's generalizable. It can even be self-refining if properly taught. Um, and so it's really a different paradigm of how you do it. And ultimately, it actually is a more approachable paradigm. So it really requires less of a technical skill set to understand how to interact with it and then find good applications to use it for. So like I was mentioned, these ideas have been around for a while, right? Folks have been trying to figure out how do you automate different kinds of things for decades now. And so again, starting back in the 90s, we have these, Clippy. I think in the 2000s, you started to get into more rule-based chatbots. If folks remember like AOL Instant Messenger, there was like an AOL Instant Messenger bot, and this is like in the mid 2000s. Very rule-based, right? It's just looking and finding keywords in the text that you're messaging it, and then trying to extract information and just give you almost like a search result back for whatever those keywords were. In the 2010s, we got a little more sophisticated. For the more technical folks, like this is when we started seeing the emergence of neural nets and intent classification, where you'd actually start getting some of what you might consider thinking AI. But still pretty rudimentary, right? And this led us to the ability to write basic chatbots that could do some like rough chat-like things. We could even automate some subroutines. Like if you wanted one application to fire off a notification to another, you could use some machine learning classifier to decide whether or not these relationships should fire and data should be shared or whatever it might be. But ultimately, we land in the 2020s, and in the post LLM world, it's quite easy actually to spin up conversational chatbots and voice assistants and the like. What's tough about it, especially when this technology initially debuted, was we found that there were some pretty big bugs, right? Are folks familiar with this term hallucinations? So hallucinations are the idea that part of the core architecture of how large language models work is they're very optimistic about their knowledge base and trying to answer questions. And sometimes they would make stuff up, right? And we saw this a lot, I'd say in 2022, 2023. And in recent years, like, in the last really 18 months, folks have gotten really good about minimizing those risks and the underlying technology being truly ready to support agentic tasks, right? We don't want, if we give some outcome oriented result, that the AI is going to try to make stuff up or synthesize information that's not right, right? So we've gotten pretty good at being able to constrain the AI, do a really good job figuring out what that outcome is and making sure the AI has the right guardrails to get you there. And that's kind of what we see today, right? So here at Polymorphic and other folks are developing as well. We have a chat product that can do just that. And you can kind of see that the screenshot on the left. What are parks nearby me, right? And like that question, maybe in the pre agentic AI world would have been answered with, a Google search kind of answer. But there's a little more complicated if you don't know the address just yet, right? So, if you're in Rowan County, North Carolina, and you just ask that question, it might just give you any parks in Rowan County, North Carolina. But where the agentic piece comes in is that AI agent, as we would call it, understands that it's missing this piece of information in order to get you that answer, right? And so the AI is making the decision saying, hey, I need this extra piece of information, which is what is your address, right? And then ideally it's going to take the address and do what we would call geocoding, turn that address into a lat long. So now it knows exactly where you are on a map. And then it can also know the lat longs of all those parks that are in your county or in your city or whatever it might be. And actually start doing math and saying, which are the closest parks to you? Let me give you the list in terms of like sorted order of like what is the furthest away. So you can kind of see that progression, right? Where you're going from really more of like a kind of like search functionality, which is just parks, right? And like we can list parks like Google can list parks. But there's this other piece where we can actually start to think about what makes a better answer to this question. And in this case, it almost sounds silly because it's so simple, but what could really help is just knowing what your address is, like where are you, and thinking about it almost like a human would think about how would I describe or how would I figure out what's closest to somebody, right? I would want to know where they are, want to know where all these other things are, and then actually do some, computers are good at this part, but do the math of figuring out how far is this thing actually from me. So it's quite cool in, really just 15 years, how far this technology's come, specifically when we think about the applications for local government. So this is a good question. I've kind of touched on it a little bit here, but why now? There's a few non-technical reasons why I think it's a great time for agentic AI, and really bringing it to local government organizations, across New Jersey or really across the country. The first is we're seeing rising service expectations from residents. I think especially as the private sector continues to focus more and more on this idea of customer service, right? Like if we order a package on Amazon, we get 2-day shipping. Sometimes in New Jersey, because it's so dense, we can even get 1-day or same-day shipping, right? And the entire time through that process, you know exactly where your package is. Now, when you get to government, sometimes you file an application and you kind of almost feel like you're filing into the void as a resident, right? And like you're not getting an update, you don't know what the status is. It's not even clear where you go to get the status of it. And if you didn't want the status, you'd probably have to pick up the phone, call in. That's going to use 3 to 5 minutes of a staffer's time just to give you an answer that, and when Amazon does it, it's almost self-serve, right? There's no staffer time required for you to go in your Amazon account and just say, my orders, where is my order, right? And so we see this rising expectation from residents about how easy it should be to engage and sort of almost what that like customer service expectation looks like. And so, for folks in the government, the expectations rising as well. And it's really tough in government to hire the staff and maintain the staff to be able to maintain that high level of customer service. And so in order to match that, AI is a really good way of doing it. And specifically, agentic AI can really help with those kinds of problems. And like I mentioned, in our own research at Polymorphic, we kind of keep an eye on like the different pushes and pulls of what is getting people onto our AI products. And I do think that staff shortages and burnout is an incredibly powerful one. Across the country, I would say in most departments, we see 20 to 40% of headcount is just open, right? So most departments are understaffed. And then the folks who are there, especially when you think about the folks who are on the customer service side, think about folks who are, front desk, concierge, answering the phone, answering voicemails, answering emails. Those are usually slightly more junior positions, but with really high turnover, right? And so that's really tough for the organization on both sides, right? It's like we don't have enough people, and then the people we have seem to turn over quite a bit. And so one of the ways you can improve on both of those fronts is incorporating agentic AI tools to help with just the sheer amount of workload, and then two, kind of offloading some of those more basic questions, administrative tasks, stuff that staff really doesn't enjoy doing, to really create a better workplace and a better place where folks don't want to turn over so often, limiting that burnout. And so AI can really even help you on keeping staff happy and engaged in the work. I think as we've progressed more and more through software being deployed to help with these things, because lots of softwares that make promises of helping staff or making things more efficient, we see that we're getting to the point where now there's a lot of legacy systems in local government technology as well. And so there's some agentic automation or workflow process automation tool you can use to help automate actions inside of legacy systems or build similar flows in more robust ways using agentic tools. And then finally, I think there is a little bit of a technical pull here too, where I do think the new capabilities, of course, create new use cases, new things you can do with these AI tools. But I do think in particular, what we've seen that's really powerful is multilingual AI. And I'm sure this is especially powerful in New Jersey. I think New Jersey is, statistically the most diverse state in the country, and in most municipalities or counties, you see that there's lots of languages being spoken. And typically when you think about the customer service piece, it's hard to staff in, say beyond English and maybe Spanish, hard to staff. But, in New Jersey, there's lots of people who speak Chinese and Korean and Hindi as first languages. And what's really cool about the AI tools now is that, they can speak 20 to 50 languages depending what tools you're using. And so for a lot of residents, it's pretty amazing for them to be able to engage in the language that they're accustomed to communicating in. So another very, very powerful use case for AI is simply just meeting residents where they are in terms of the languages that they want to speak. So I know we touched on a little bit about this, but I do think really hammering home these capabilities is super important, right? And so again, the difference between agentic AI and traditional AI is really like when it comes to task orchestration or that work process automation stuff, it's really about the flexibility of these end-to-end workflows, right? Like being able to handle a huge swath of different information, especially in local government, right? We see all kinds of data. We see people messing up forms and applications in ways we couldn't imagine. And the traditional rule sets probably aren't going to survive very well through that because you need good training data and you need historical good data that's representative of what people are going to do in the future, right? Really tough problem to solve. Agentic AI sort of brings that common sense element to a lot of this and makes things pretty flexible. Another one that we've seen that's pretty powerful is this idea of a knowledge engine. I'm sure most folks, organizations have way more data than they know what to do with, right? And a lot of this is just like text unstructured data, right? So at Polymorphic, what we'll see a lot of is there's a ton of website content. There's a ton of just PDF documents and repositories of whether it's spreadsheets with budgets and whatever it might be, just tons of data that's really unstructured. And a lot of times like that actual knowledge or information is siloed within the organization, right? So it's like someone might know all about budgets and forecasting. Somebody else might know all about the different departments and all the services, or even on the per department level. And it's not really clear, even if you're a staff, where to go to get all this information. And so one of the interesting things we've seen is folks actually using, not even AI tooling on like the chatbot public facing side of things, but actually using it in-house to help their own staff understand, train, learn, and communicate information. It's very powerful stuff. Another one we see a lot is this ability of AI to route inbound appropriately. We've seen some counties in New Jersey who have said 40% of the calls they get are not intended for their department or their organization, right? And most residents don't know, they don't see government as a monolith, right? And they're like, hey, if I call into the government, I should be hitting the right person who can answer my question or help me get whatever service delivered that I want delivered. But that's not how it works, right? The government's a really big thing with a lot of different departments and a lot of different specializations. And most residents don't know that or don't appreciate that or don't know where to go. And so a lot of times, they'll call in or they'll try to email or even sometimes walk in and they're in the wrong department. And a lot of time is spent just routing calls or inbound requests to the right place. This is another place where AI can be super, super helpful in getting people directed to the right resources in a pretty unstructured way. Because a lot of times folks don't even know the right terminology for the thing that they need help with, and that's another way where that flexibility of the agentic AI can really be helpful in guiding this inbound to the right resources. And then finally, it's very approachable, right? So being able to speak in plain human language is really accessible for everybody. You don't need to have a strong technical background or know the ins and outs of how it works to be able to just talk with the AI, or especially if it's in your language of choice, or just being able to use normal English terms when maybe there's some like more legal or specific terminology around certain processes, right? And so letting the AI handle a lot of that understanding piece and being able to translate, plain English into what might be like building code language or different regulatory rules on applying for different programs. Also really, really useful as folks don't know those things. And then finally, we have these last two here. Learning from feedback, of course, is important. As we build and iterate any kind of AI system, we're going to want to get better over time. And agentic AI is no different. And if anything, makes it even easier to iterate over time. Being able to go in, look at all the, inputs and outputs. So like, what was the prescribed action? What was the scenario? What was the outcome? And then being able to communicate to it to do what we would in the AI world call active learning. Tell it, hey, you made a mistake here, or this was actually a good outcome. You did the right thing here. And over time, that AI tool becomes better at doing that thing. And usually, if you give concrete examples, it can do pattern matching really well, really fast with even a limited set of examples, even stronger than what traditional automation software would require in terms of training data. And finally, it's this context awareness piece, right? So it is bringing that specific understanding. So as you're giving that feedback to the learning, being able to point at specific policies or specific pieces of information or resources to direct the AI and saying, hey, look, this you might have made a mistake on, and here's the resource you should have pulled, and this would have led you to the right result. And letting the AI learn that way too. So you don't even always just have to tell it exactly what to do. You can almost tell it, hey, this was the right content or resource you should have drawn from. And then from there, it can actually do a lot of learning on its own because now it's understanding where the right rules or right information actually is. And so just to hammer this home, like I just really clean, concrete examples of what the difference between, a scenario in traditional automation and a scenario in this new agentic world would be. And so, in traditional automation, let's say somebody submits a form or an application online. Traditional automation might be, okay, we fire an email to a specific staffer or all staffers that, hey, this application came in. In the agentic world, why that changes is someone submits that application or form, AI looks at that form and decides, hey, this form is meant for John, or this form is meant for Connor based on some parameters on that form, escalates to the right staff in the right scenarios, right? So now it's doing a little bit of thinking there in firing that email or whatever that notification system is, as opposed to just a generalized rule saying when application comes in, send this email. So pretty big difference there. Similarly, application process notifications, right? So application comes in, we might have some basic logic on that application to say like, hey, you need to have these fields filled out, right? And maybe that can be automatically rejected if that form isn't properly filled out. But what's interesting about the agentic AI world is we can take that one step further and write rule sets, and we'll have an example of this concretely in a second here, write rule sets on what makes a good application and letting the AI pre-review that application and either leave comments or kick it back to the person who filed that application with those comments. And so before a staff even has to look at an application, the AI sort of pre-screened it and directed you to the right spots or flagged anything that seems wrong. So more robust than just writing basic rules of saying, hey, these fields need to be filled out or something like that. But do these fields actually, the values of these fields make sense together? In terms of chat, we talked about this a little bit. You had your basic chat bot that could just, more like keyword search extraction and then give you more like search style results. But being able to carry context through the conversation. So, in our chat, we use this example, which is you might first ask like, hey, how do I get a building permit? And then your next question might be, how much does that cost? Right. It sounds simple or trivial because again, these AI systems are getting better. We're getting so accustomed to that conversational context being naturally carried across that when you say how much does it cost or how much does that cost, one, it might ask you a follow-up question saying like, is this residential? Is this commercial? Whatever it might be, but still knowing you're talking about a building permit. And then finally, as it gives you a final answer, again, knowing specifically the context of what you're talking about and carrying that conversation through like a human would carry context through a conversation. This is really powerful in making the AI tooling really easy to use. I think chatbots are an interesting one historically in particular, as I think the promise was really high, say 10, 15 years ago of what chatbots would be able to do. And really haven't fulfilled that promise until the last few years because the underlying technology just wasn't quite ready yet. And here's one of my favorite examples of automation versus agentic AI. I think a lot of us do automation in our organizations with IVRs and phone trees, right? So it's resident calls in, hey, greeting message. All right, now we're going to route you to the right department. All right, press 1 for public works, press 2 for economic development, press 3 for so-and-so, 8 and 7, 8, 9, and so on. And 9 is a lot of times press 9 for more options, right? And so now you have 2 pages of menus. And sometimes we've seen some implementations of AI systems or IVR systems where that initial menu is maybe like 2 or 3 pages long. It's a bunch of departments that the average resident doesn't know a whole lot about. So not sure, like, am I trying to reach out to economic development? Am I trying to reach out to public works? Like, who am I supposed to call here? And this is, again, where that agentic step is super powerful, where you can have a very natural sounding greeting, pick up the phone, be like, hey, this is the automated agent from such and such organization. How can I help you today? Right. And then the resident on their side can describe their problem in normal English terms, like they describe it to a person, and that concierge agentic AI agent understands what types of problems each of those departments actually solves and can direct you straight there, right? So it's a much more pleasant user experience. And so that really comes to that like customer service satisfaction piece, but then also can get you to where you need to go faster, right? Like dealing with that IVR tree, a lot of times you end up in the wrong department. That will, consume some staffer time in the wrong department as they route you to the right one. And then of course, if you're the resident on the phone, you feel like you're being ping ponged around this phone tree, where it might take you 5, 6, 7 minutes to land where you meant to land, and sometimes that's even a good case because often you'll hit a specific department that doesn't have knowledge about the whole organization, so they even struggle to route you to the right place. So you might be ping ponged around a little bit before you actually land where you're supposed to land and can get the help you're looking for. Whereas when we think about these AI concierge agents just being able to answer in natural human language and understand what these departments do and just get you to the right place really fast every time. So it's quite a big jump between automation and agentic AI. And I think, sometimes from within the organization, it seems like automation is automation across the board. But then when you start thinking about what makes the resident happy and what can even make staff happy, as we move more and more into this agentic world, we'll see more and more ability to do both of those things on top of these different new agentic AI platforms. All right, so we have a bit of a cool demo here. I would say worth if you want to take a moment to just take a screenshot of this, and we'll show this again at the end. But after this call, I think it's worth calling this number and trying this series of questions. And so this is just like a example of an agentic AI voice, kind of like I described, that can help you get some information about intoxicated drivers resource center. This is just the early use case that we're working on here. But it's pretty cool. It's pretty powerful. So if anyone wants to take a moment, just like either screenshot this, or Connor at the end, if we can just send this out, I think that'd be pretty awesome for folks to be able to just give this AI a call when they get a chance. You also notice it has like a pretty good New Jersey accent and voice too. So we can even make these AI voices sound native to wherever you are, right? So we have some customers who are in North Carolina, we can give it a little bit of a southern drawl, southern twang. In New Jersey, we'll have AI voices that kind of mirror the population there. So it's pretty cool what you can do these days. All right. And so, I've talked a little bit about, how do we, getting cases or applications to the right place. This is like a screenshot from within our product, but right now, one of the things we do is enable folks to write rules in our case management system, right? So when a case comes in, so if somebody files a case or a ticket, a lot of times it's really hard to codify the rules of the routing you want, right? And so maybe it's a building, maybe it's building permits, and if it's public versus, or sorry, if it's residential versus commercial, maybe it depends on the zoning you're in, like who in the staff typically takes that application, right? And you might have 5 or 10 rules that maybe are easy to say out loud, but then you go to sit down and you try to write them out in terms of code or logical rules. And sometimes it's really hard, especially when the data coming in isn't super well structured, right? A lot of times it's, free text fields, or, just write something in here, describe what you're trying to do. So this is where these agentic AI tools can be really good about understanding rule sets, doing that semantic understanding, as we would call it, on whatever information is coming in, and being able to apply those rule sets. And so, we have cases in our case management system where when the application comes in, AI can look at it and make sure the right staff is actually then routed or CC'd or shown that case, because we know from either historical precedent or from some pretty easy to write English-based rule set that so and so should be privy to this application, or should be the one reviewing this case, or the main case manager for it. So it's a very powerful tool, again, in just getting the right requests to the right people. Very, very strong capability of agentic AI tooling across the board. And here's a fun one. I think this might be my favorite one of our use cases. Is taking almost at a step further, which is when applications come in, and I hinted at this a little bit, being able to do application pre-reviews, right? So application comes in, so many applications that come in, we realize like data is missing, the things people said just don't make a lot of sense. And so letting the AI take the first pass at a review to either kick it back to the applicant and say, hey, I think you might have gotten something wrong here. Can you take a look at these fields? Like, this doesn't quite make sense. Or leaving comments so that the staffer can then be quickly directed to the problem points in the application, and take their review time down considerably. And again, this goes into the same boat. A lot of times there's hard rules to codify, and really hard to get generalized, almost like common sense in those rule sets, until this world of agentic AI. Connor, if you want to flip to the next slide, I have like the full screenshot here. So this is just a totally random, silly example, but I think we've all seen this happen, right? We have a process here for filing a ticket where, hey, my email inbox is at capacity. I need more storage in my inbox, right? And we ask some questions in this intake form. Hey, can you describe your issue? Maybe we don't get such a thorough response. That person's just like, hey, I can't send emails. Give me more space. Or clear out my inbox, right? And then maybe a follow-up question that we have, that you can see at the bottom there, is how many emails are in your inbox currently, right? And we see 24, right? Might be hard to write a rule set for this. AI looks at this application, and you can see the comment it's left here, which is that this person doesn't have that many emails. So it's really strange that they would be out of space. So, they could even start by immediately filing this or sending this application back to the end user saying, hey, have you tried deleting large attachments that you don't need? Because you probably have a few consuming a lot of that space, right? And so it's like these flexible, again, maybe hard to codify rule sets that the AI is able to apply that common sense piece to pre-reviewing applications or routing calls to the right place, and something that historically just did not exist in automation exists in these agentic AI systems. And so, okay, where do we start, right? I know this all sounds good and all, but like all technology, sometimes it's hard to figure out exactly where it fits into your workflow, where it fits into your organization. What's a good way to get started? I would say the top of the process to getting started is, what are those repetitive, high volume pain points? Where do you think it feels like staff is spending too much time on basic things? Excuse me. And in a similar vein, like just auditing the current workflows. Where do we think that there's bottlenecks in these workflows where either uh, different different barriers to service delivery are getting hung up? Maybe it's in different application processing, different administrative processes. Like, where are we getting stuck? Where is the organization seeing bottlenecks in the, we would think about it as like a funnel of getting all these applications through this funnel. Where are those bottlenecks? What are the problems? And I think you can always just start there. It's just figuring out where the bottlenecks are, and then prioritizing, the bottlenecks as you find them all. Like, where do we think we'd get the most ROI? Where are we more short-staffed? Where are the most urgent needs, right? Sometimes we'll even see certain times of year as like spikes in certain types of applications or certain types of questions that people call in. Across the country, like in the fall, you get like huge inbound on like leaf pickup. Sometimes after the holidays, you'll get like bulk trash pickup. If there's a disaster or like a hurricane hitting or something like that, like you'll see a spike in calls around this one particular thing. And so, as these things pop up, you can identify, where did we end up short-staffed or bottlenecked on being able to serve residents. And it could be simple things like that, like, hey, folks, there's a hurricane coming and people didn't know like whether they had to evacuate or not, or where the nearest shelter was, or whatever it might be. And so next time around, you can think about, where can we apply agentic AI tools to help assist in any of these pieces. Um, the cool thing here is that you can start really small. So like I said, we have the Polymorphic, we have a chatbot product. What's interesting about that chatbot product is, when we built it, we intended it initially to be a public facing thing and something that residents interacted with to get answers to questions when staff wasn't able to help them quickly. What we found quickly was that staff was actually going to their own websites to ask questions on these chatbots. And so we kind of tweaked the product. And so now we have two versions of our chat. We have an internal only chatbot, and we have this public facing chatbot. And so we now have this chatbot that can act as a knowledge assistant for the staff. And so, like I was saying, like a lot of folks will have a huge corpus of data, right? That might be website content, PDFs, spreadsheets, whatever it might be. And the agentic AI tools are really good if we basically give it all this data, being able to synthesize it and give pretty concise answers. And so when we see staff who might be, manning the front desk, or, in the training phase, so they're pretty new to the organization, don't know a whole lot yet, these internal chatbots can be super useful in, guiding them to the right place, the right resources, and ultimately like training them up so that they do know all this stuff, firsthand. But it's a very easy, safe way to pilot a pretty innovative, cool AI technology, right? And we see a lot of folks starting there, which is, we're not quite ready for it to start answering questions for residents, but if we can start answering questions for our own staff, like that's step one. Step two might be then deploying it on the resident side, so now residents can call in. And then step three might be pulling it into our actual application processing, or whatever service delivery flows. And that's where you can get into those like AI pre-screens of applications and things like that. So it's definitely very easy to get started, and there's a very natural on-ramp of where to begin in both like organizationally simple way, but then also from like a technological buy-in way, right? Like, how do we make sure folks are appreciating the value of this technology? And usually if you like put an AI chatbot that is very trained on your data and materials in the hands of staff or even executives in the organization, they'll see the value very quickly. And so you can get that sort of technological belief and buy-in, but then also you can communicate why this is valuable for the organization very, very quickly. All right, how to find ROI, right? And so like a lot of things, we want to be able to measure whether or not they're successful. And so, just some simple rules or ideas around how do we make sure like we've picked the right use cases and we can prove that we're doing well on them, right? And so it all goes back to starting with just benchmarking where we are today. So before you deploy an AI, it's great to just understand, kind of like we were talking about, like when you do that analysis of saying, where are we bottlenecked in our organization, actually quantifying what those bottlenecks look like how much time are we spending on this problem, or how many applications are stuck in the pending state, or in the in between these two states of being approved or rejected or whatever it might be. But important to quantify it, and then ultimately then you want to measure AI tool usage, right? And so this is kind of number two, where you're measuring AI engagement. You want to be able to track how much folks are actually using the AI, what impact it's making on those benchmark metrics. So like after deploying the AI, we saw usage go up by 100%, and we saw the number of applications stuck in the pending review state fall by 80%, right? That's a good sign that the AI is helping either generate or get better applications inbound, answering resident questions upstream, right? Sometimes it can be even hard to attribute, but that's why it's important to have good quantifiable metrics around what is success, and being able to connect those metrics improving to deployment of different AI tool sets. I think this can be pretty cool, especially for more leadership thinking in the organization, is how do we convert these improvements into dollars, right? A lot of times, different organizations are strapped for cash, and part of being able to justify different types of investment is how much money can this actually save us? Maybe it's reduced workload, we're going to pay less overtime, different kinds of efficiency gains translated into dollars for the organizations that they are probably better spent elsewhere, right? And so this is a place where AI tooling and even automation historically can usually be converted to dollars. Again, if we benchmark properly, we understand where we're spending time and how much that time costs. But I do think that also brings us to number four, which is there's other intangible benefits that you can't really quantify in dollar cost very easily. And this jumps back to that idea of how do we do really good customer service and make sure that folks are getting a great experience when they engage with their government. And so these are kind of harder to quantify, but you want to you expect to see better public experience in interactions. Ideally, like staff morale is better as you're alleviating them from working on some of the more repetitive, redundant tasks that aren't the fun part of their job. And ideally, like long term, like improving public trust in the quality of government that they're getting. And a lot of times, that can just lead folks to engage more civically. And so, hard to measure those sorts of things, but very, very important pieces to the ROI framework overall of what agentic AI tools can enable, especially when positioned for this customer service improvement piece. Cool. So that's the presentation part of this. So of course, happy to answer questions, have a discussion, and of course, if we don't get to chat about your question or something hits you later today when you're driving home, feel free to email me. That's kpatel@polymorphic.com. Always happy to chat. We have a lot of content on our website too. If you check out polymorphic.com, lots of blog posts, ideas describing how agentic AI can work for government. And then, like I mentioned before, we have a pretty cool agentic AI voice demo at that phone number. So be sure to give that a call as soon as we're off here today as well.
Kyle, John Tugman, what LLM is Polymorphic's AI capabilities built on?
Yeah, so we are a partner of OpenAI, and so we work
Okay.
pretty closely with them. We have some cool relationship with them. So we're like in a zero data retention agreement with them, so they don't store any of our data, nothing we use their LLMs for. But yeah, under the hood, we use a lot of OpenAI tools, and more so, we're an active partner in the work they do too.
Thanks.
Yeah. It's a good question, right? So I do think what's interesting about this movement to agentic AI, is there what we would call the like bedrock models or the core models, foundational models are being built by just a few companies around the world, right? Think, Google, Microsoft slash OpenAI, Anthropic. Um, these are companies that are investing tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into training these models. Um, and they're building really good generalizable models, right? But for folks who are building at the application layer, the days of being able to build a model from scratch yourself and being able to have really high quality, those days are likely over, right? So typically you're building off of the OpenAI models or some other companies' model sets.
Anybody else have any questions?
Anything at all.
Connor or Kelly, or you could either write them in or you could speak them.
Yeah, no kidding.
And
That way, I appreciate you guys giving us the opportunity to chat today. I dropped in the chat as well, talking about the ROI piece. I know John and I were talking about it before everyone jumped
yes,
on. Is really it's a critical part, right? Is proving out, hey, we know AI is here, we know it's important to use, but how do we prove the ROI of bringing on free tools or bringing on tools like Polymorphic, right? So just dropped in an ebook that we created for those conversations. Feel free to take a look at it,
okay.
and go from there. But no, we really appreciate the opportunity today.
No, and thank you. Yeah, and as our political group here, they don't care about the buzz of AI. It can do things faster, better. They're like, who cares? Show me the money.
It can do that too, right? I think that's what's pretty cool about the technology, right? I think if we think about if we like zoom out and think about like general technological adoption curves, the idea that this technology went from being like brand new, cutting edge, like you're saying, John, like, yeah,
Yeah,
sure, it can do some cool stuff, but like, how is that valuable? And I would say like what's really, really special about it is within like 2 years of it even existing, we're seeing like real tangible super valuable use cases that can save the bottom line dollars and cents. Like, why is this valuable to us? Where historically I think there's been a lot of technology that's been released where it maybe takes 5, 10, 15, sometimes never does it actually become valuable, right? It sounds like a cool idea and doesn't go anywhere. I think this is a total opposite of that. This is a cool idea, but also very quickly translatable into what money can we save today. And so if folks are out there thinking about it that way, you're probably gonna see great returns. Additionally, there's all those intangible pieces of value that it can also deliver. So pretty awesome across the board.
yeah. As you mentioned, Kyle, one of the important things is to, when you're picking your initiative or your project, to choose one where you're going to see some ROI, or you have some idea before you start
Yep.
how you're going to come up with an ROI for that particular effort. Um, here in the county, what happened with the surrogate, they uh, got involved, they started this initiative, they're introducing some AI capabilities, but they didn't have any statistics of what they had been doing up until that point. So there was no comparison with today versus yesterday, as far as the services that they could deliver. So they're having a little bit of a difficult time trying to come up with an ROI as a result. And I would see that being similar for most of us, as we engage in some AI capabilities. What was the past? How were things done? It's important to capture that information, um, as you start or before you start down and doing an AI initiative.
Totally. Yeah. And we've seen like a lot of really simple, easy ways to qualify ROI too, right? Like it doesn't have to be complicated, right? One of the early metrics we've seen. So, with the chat bot, a lot of times what folks will start internal on the voice AI side. So these are like voice AI lines you can call in over the phone. A lot of folks will just start with having the AI active for nights and weekends, right? When there's no staff online. Instead of accumulating voicemails, let's just have the AI answer questions. And if the AI can't answer it, it'll still go to voicemail, right? So the AI will give the option of saying, hey, if you didn't get the answer you need, you can still go to voicemail. So we're not removing the ability to leave a voicemail. But then if you look at the number of voicemails that actually come in, let's say on Monday morning when you come in, like what used to be the average number of voicemails in the post AI deployment, what is the new number of voicemails? I think on average, we've seen something like 70 to 90% reduction in voicemails, right? Hugely valuable. And if you think about one voicemail being, okay, someone has to sit there, listen to it, figure out how to respond, either call back, email back, whatever it is, every voicemail is like 5-7 minutes of Stafford time. And it's not that hard to then turn 200 voicemails into, 1,000 minutes, and then understanding that's, whatever that is, 15 hours of staff time, 18 hours of staff time, how much that costs, right? And so it doesn't have to be like a super complicated algorithm for assessing ROI. Because the value here ends up being so clear, even pretty simple metrics can lead you to the right place in terms of what the value you're getting from.
Correct, I agree. In the case of the surrogate here in the county, they're looking at, we were able to support the help desk 5x8. Now it's 24/7, weekends, etc. And answering calls, again, 24/7, where it used to only be 5x8.
Yep. But again, it's like there's cool ways where you can like deploy it in what feels like a less invasive way, right? So like you're suggesting, John, like a lot of folks do that, where it's, hey, we'll start with this, for certain slots of the week and see how the AI does compared to humans during the day if folks are getting questions answered. In our own tooling, like we allow you to review the logs and see everything the AI said, listen to the conversations it had. And so you can kind of monitor it when you're in that rollout phase to see if it's doing a good job. But again, like John suggests, at a certain point, like you realize it's doing a pretty good job, and being able to have that ability 24/7 around the clock is great. And so then you go live with it across the board. The problem is if you weren't collecting data before you started all that, it's pretty hard to then know what was the baseline and then where are we today and how much money is this actually saving us. But if you just collect a little bit of data up front, it's really not too tricky.
Exactly. Okay, folks, short of any more questions, I'll allow Kyle and Connor to conclude this presentation. And Kyle and Connor, thank you very much. Good, very informative presentation. And hopefully folks were able to take away something from this. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you everybody for the time. And again, like I said, call that number, grab that phone number, give it a call. Email me if you have questions, thoughts, if something hits you in the shower on the drive home, like feel free to email me. And then, check out polymorphic.com. We have a lot of cool case studies, examples of where AI is helping folks in the real world.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Cool.
All right, gentlemen. Well, I want to thank you and thank you for a great presentation. Short of any more questions, we can conclude the event. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.
Here.
Cool.
Okay.